Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku became rebellion and fell for Himiko? Part 2, Final. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Cenizas del Heroísmo by Valkyris_Prime. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Momo Yaoyorozu was summoned to the UA meeting room after Nezu, the academy's headmaster, learned of her return following her kidnapping from summer camp. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi and All Might were also present, sitting next to Nezu at a long, well-lit table. Momo entered calmly, but her face showed signs of emotional exhaustion. "Momo, we're so glad you're back safe and sound," Nezu said in his usual calm tone, though his small eyes watched her with calculating intensity. "However, we need to discuss the details of your kidnapping and, most importantly, your rescue." Momo sat down in the chair offered to her and took a deep breath before speaking. "I understand. I'll tell you what I can." Naomasa, with his notebook ready, was the first to speak. "Miss Yaoyorozu, we know you were rescued from the Camino warehouses. The same night Spawn killed All for One. Is it true he was the one who rescued you?" Momo nodded, knowing she couldn't lie about such an obvious fact. "Yes. It was Spawn who got me out of that place." The silence that followed was heavy. All Might, in his weakened Toshinori Yagi form, leaned forward, his eyes filled with concern. "Spawn? The same one who killed All for One?" "The same," Momo confirmed, in a firm tone. Naomasa took advantage to put pressure. "Where did he take you? Where is he now? This information could be crucial to ensuring he's not a bigger threat than All for One." Momo clenched her hands in her lap, maintaining her composure. "I'm sorry, but I can't tell you where it is." Naomasa frowned. "Momo, you understand that this isn't just a matter of personal safety. Spawn is a dangerous entity. If we know where he is, we can try to prevent further tragedies." "I know he's dangerous," Momo replied, her voice firm but calm. "I saw it with my own eyes. But I also saw something else. He's not like All for One. He doesn't seek chaos or power." Nezu intervened before Naomasa could reply, his tone calm but inquisitive. "So, Momo, what do you think Spawn is after?" Momo thought for a moment, remembering Izuku's words in the church. "He seeks justice. In a brutal way, yes, but he's not the villain you think he is." All Might, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice laced with concern. "Momo, you understand what you're saying, right? Spawn killed All for One, but not in a way that could be considered heroic. If this being is capable of such brutality, he could be even worse than All for One himself." Momo looked at him directly, her gaze determined. "With all due respect, All Might, you weren't there. You didn't see what he did for me. Spawn isn't looking to destroy the world. He's fighting something you don't even understand yet." Silence fell over the room as Nezu clasped his paws together in thought. "Momo, I understand your position, but as an institution, we must evaluate any potential threat. However, we must also trust the judgment of those who have directly faced it." Naomasa exhaled deeply, closing his notebook. "It's clear we won't get Spawn's location from you. But at least we need to know this. Do you think he'll act again?" Momo looked down for a moment before answering. "I think so, but it won't be to cause senseless destruction. It will be because the system failed, and because there are things that need to be corrected." All Might leaned back in his chair, clearly disturbed by the response. "What if it becomes something we can't control?" Momo looked at him, her eyes shining with determination. "Then I hope you find a way to talk to him before that happens. Because if you treat him as an enemy without understanding him, you'll become the very thing he seeks to destroy." The comment left everyone silent, even Nezu, who looked at her with a mixture of admiration and caution. Finally, the director nodded. "Thank you, Momo. Your sincerity is invaluable." As Momo stood up to leave, Naomasa and All Might exchanged worried glances, but neither said anything else. They knew that the world of heroes had changed with Spawn's appearance, and how to deal with it would be a question they would need to answer soon. Before walking through the door to leave the meeting room, Momo stopped, turning to look at Nezu, Naomasa, and All Might. Her expression was firm, and her words quickly hit like a hammer. "I want you to know something before I go," he began, his tone calm but definitive. "I will not be returning to UA.
My family and I have decided to withdraw our investments in the Academy and any hero-related programs.
The silence that followed was deafening. Nezu tilted his head slightly, as if processing what he'd just heard, while Naomasa frowned, clearly surprised. All Might looked down, unable to respond immediately. Why? Nezu asked, breaking the silence with his calm but concerned voice. Is this because of Spawn?
Momo nodded, looking directly at the director. Not just because of him, but because of what his existence and what happened to me have revealed. The hero system is broken. UA was unable to protect me, and the commission, which should uphold justice, is rife with corruption. I can't continue supporting something that isn't what it claims to be.
Naomasa tried to intervene, her tone conciliatory but firm. Momo, I understand you're disappointed, but not all heroes or institutions are like that. There's still hope to change the system from within. I'm sorry, Detective, Momo replied with a slight nod, but I don't think that's possible anymore. With those words, Momo left the room, closing the door behind her.
The closing of the door echoed in the room, followed by a heavy silence. Nezu, Naomasa, and All Might remained seated, each processing the implications of what they had just heard.
For Nezu, Momo's decision was a significant blow. Not only were they losing one of UA's most promising students, but they were also losing the financial backing of one of the country's most influential families. Beyond that, what really weighed on his mind was the emotional impact Spawn seemed to have on those who knew him. First Kota Izumi. Naomasa murmured, breaking the silence, and now Momo. They both had encounters with Spawn and came out, change. All Might, still in his weakened form, looked up, his face filled with concern. It's more than that, Naomasa. They're not just change. They seem to have lost faith in us.
Naomasa nodded slowly, remembering how Kota had spoken admiringly about the monster who had killed Muscular. Now, Momo, someone who had always been a model of dedication to the hero system, had decided to abandon that path altogether.
It's not just the loss of their financial support or their talent, Nezu said, his tone thoughtful. It's what this symbolizes. Spawn isn't just taking on villains. He's dismantling the public perception of who we are. All Might clenched his fists weakly, feeling an overwhelming weight on his shoulders. If this continues, the world could lose faith in heroes altogether. Silence fell over the room again as the three tried to imagine how they might face a figure like Spawn, not only in combat, but in the impact he was having on the system they had dedicated their lives to protecting. The following month brought a disturbing change to the landscape of heroes and villains in Japan. Bodies began appearing on the streets, both wanted villains and questionable heroes, all bearing signs of overwhelming brutality. Initial investigations revealed an alarming pattern. The murders were not simple executions, but acts of calculated violence that sent a clear message. The victims were found with severe injuries, torn limbs, mangled torsos, and faces marked by inhuman rage. At each scene, a graffiti remained as a seal. We do not forget, we do not forgive. At the same time, several Heroes Commission headquarters were set on fire across the country. The fires were targeted and always occurred at night, when the buildings were empty or minimally staffed. Although no one died in these attacks, the material losses were significant, and the messages left on the burned walls were the same. We do not forget, we do not forgive. The commission attempted to keep the attacks out of the public eye, but social media leaks and photos and videos appearing on digital platforms made it impossible to hide. Rumors began to circulate, linking these acts to Spawn, the same being who had killed All for One a month earlier. Fear and confusion quickly spread throughout the hero community. Some veteran heroes began to question their safety, especially those with a history of questionable behavior. Spawn didn't seem to distinguish between heroes and villains. His only criteria seemed to be corruption and a lack of justice. The public was divided. On one hand, many were horrified by the brutality of the acts and feared for the stability of the hero system. On the other hand, some were beginning to see Spawn as a symbol of justice in a system that was clearly failing. On social media, the debates were intense. User 1. Spawn is a monster. There is no justification for such brutality, no matter how corrupt its targets. User 2. Why aren't the heroes talking about this? Are they afraid? Spawn is exposing their hypocrisy. User 3. If the commission is so fair, why don't they explain why their headquarters are being targeted? something's not right. Nezu, Detective Naomasa, and a select group of heroes began an intensive investigation to try to predict Spawn's next move. However, clues were scarce. Spawn operated in the shadows, and his knowledge of the system seemed too precise to be a fluke. He's no ordinary villain, Naomasa said at a meeting. He's methodical, ruthless, and seems to know exactly where to strike to cause the greatest damage to the system. Nezu, sitting with a thoughtful expression, replied, "It's not just physical strength. It's someone who understands the weaknesses of the hero system, and is exploiting them."
Spawn's impact was shattering trust in heroes, especially the younger ones. Aspiring heroes at UA and other academies began to question the path they had chosen. Cities were in a constant state of tension, with civilians fearing for their safety while others began to secretly support Spawn's cause.
Meanwhile, Spawn continued his campaign in the shadows, leaving a clear message in every act. The world of heroes has failed, and now, justice will be served our way. All for One's death at Spawn's hands had left the League of Villains in a state of chaos. Though Tamura Shigaraki had been designated as the supreme leader's heir apparent, the brutality of the murder and the impact of Spawn's actions over the past month had shaken even his convictions. The League base was quieter than usual. The normally noisy and disorganized members now seemed restless. Rumors about Spawn spread among them, fueling both fear and curiosity. Shigaraki, sitting in a rickety armchair, drummed his fingers against the armrest. His white hair was disheveled, and his bloodshot eyes stared at a map on a table. Markers and notes showed locations of Spawn's attacks, but no concrete clues as to where he might be. "That damn monster," Shigaraki muttered, his voice filled with suppressed rage. Dabi, leaning in a corner with his arms crossed, spoke in his characteristically sarcastic tone. "Are you really surprised? All for One was playing with fire, and someone like Spawn. Well, he's not exactly the kind of enemy you let slide." "Shut up, Dabi," Shigaraki growled, slamming the table hard enough to make it shake. "This isn't just about my teacher, this is personal now." Twice, trying to ease the tension, raised his hands. Hey, we don't need to fight each other. But, is anyone else thinking maybe we should not mess with him? You know, because, well, I don't want to end up like Muscular or Moonfish." The mention of the names of their fallen comrades caused the room to fall into an awkward silence. Everyone knew Spawn was merciless, and that several members of the League had already fallen in his path of destruction. Finally, the topic Shigaraki had been avoiding came to light. "And then there's her," he said contemptuously, looking at a newspaper clipping with a blurry photo of Spawn and a female figure beside him. "Toga." Dabi raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's up with Toga? Wasn't she your favorite, Shigaraki?" "She was," Shigaraki admitted in an icy voice, "until she decided to leave us to go with him." Himiko's name had been a raw wound for Shigaraki ever since the attack on the camp. Though he'd initially decided to ignore her departure out of respect for All for One's orders, his master's death had changed everything. Now, getting Himiko back was a personal matter. "I can't believe she betrayed us like that," Shigaraki continued, his anger rising with every word. "After everything I did for her, after everything the League gave her, and now she runs into the arms of that monster?" "Are you really surprised?" Dabi asked, with a hint of mockery. "She was always a little unstable. And if Spawn can offer her something we can't, well, it's not hard to imagine why she left." "That doesn't matter," Shigaraki shouted, shooting up. "I'm going to find her, and when I do, I'll make sure she regrets betraying the League." The League had no clear plan for how to confront Spawn. The brutality of his actions and his apparent invulnerability had left even the most reckless, like Dabi, unsure of how to proceed. However, for Shigaraki, the priority was clear. Find Himiko and make her pay for her betrayal. "We're going to track her every move," Shigaraki ordered, pointing at the map. "I don't care how long it takes, I don't care how many resources we have to expend. Toga is ours, and I won't let that monster have her." Dabi sighed, clearly not as enthusiastic about the plan. "Good luck with that, boss. I hope you have more than just pure rage to deal with him, because I don't think a tantrum will be enough to defeat Spawn." Twice nodded nervously. "Yes, because, you know, I don't want to be the next corpse on the list." Shigaraki ignored them, his gaze fixed on the map. For him, this wasn't just a matter of revenge. It was a matter of pride, of reclaiming what he believed belonged to him. But even as he plotted his next move, Spawn's name echoed in the minds of everyone present. They knew that facing him meant risking everything. And while Shigaraki was willing to do it, the question was whether the rest of the league would follow him to the end. The night was silent when Izuku and Himiko arrived at the gates of one of the Hero Commission's largest headquarters. Himiko, excited as ever, carried a can of spray paint ready to mark the infamous message. "We do not forget, we do not forgive." But this time, something didn't feel right. Spawn sensed it immediately. "Himiko, stay behind me," he ordered in his deep voice, holding out his red cloak to protect her. Before they could approach the doors, a loud crash blew them outward. The impact was enough to knock Himiko backward, but Spawn's cloak extended, enveloping her and protecting her from the debris. Through the dust and smoke, the figure of Endeavor emerged, his body surrounded by intense flames. Beside him was Burnin, who seemed less sure he was there, though her expression tried to hide it. Burnin had heard about the brutality of his confrontation with All for One, and the idea of facing him was not something that excited her. "This won't be easy, Endeavor," Burnin said, his tone trying to sound confident, though his eyes betrayed his concern. Spawn stepped forward, his towering figure shrouded in shadow and his cape billowing with a life of its own. "You again," he said disdainfully, his voice echoing like a dark echo. "Last time you ended up killing me, tonight will be different." Himiko, still behind him, murmured with a mixture of admiration and excitement. "Teach them, Izuku." Endeavor wasted no time. He launched a powerful blast of fire at Spawn, an attack that would have reduced any other enemy to ash. But Spawn stood firm, extending his infernal chains that absorbed the impact like nothing. Burnin tried to circle him, launching rapid attacks to distract him, but Spawn was relentless. His cape transformed into a living wall that blocked his attacks, while his chains swung toward Endeavor with deadly precision. "Don't underestimate my fire," Endeavor shouted, increasing the intensity of his flames until the heat began to warp the air around him. But even Endeavor's hottest fire paled before the fires of hell. Spawn raised a hand, and from his fingers erupted black and green flames that engulfed Endeavor's, extinguishing them like a simple candle. "Your fire is nothing compared to mine," Spawn said, his voice ringing with icy fury. In a swift motion, Spawn closed the distance between them. His chains wrapped around Endeavor's arms, immobilizing him as he tried to unleash more fire. But before he could do anything, Spawn yanked hard, tearing his arms off in a single motion. Endeavor screamed in pain, falling to his knees as blood gushed from his shoulders. Burnin froze, her face frozen in a look of horror. Spawn held Endeavor's severed arms for a moment, regarding them as if they were trophies. Then, with a brutal gesture, he began beating Endeavor with his own arms, each blow echoing like thunder in the night. "This is for my mother," Spawn said, his tone filled with suppressed fury, "and this is for the life you stole from me." Burnin finally reacted, launching a desperate blast of fire at Spawn. But his attack was useless. His cape protected him, absorbing the flames before they could even touch him. Spawn dropped Endeavor's mangled arms to the ground, staring at Burnin with an intensity that made her flinch. "Run," he said, his voice a whisper that echoed with threat. "Run, and tell us what you saw tonight." Burnin, still trembling, obeyed. He turned and fled, leaving Endeavor behind, who lay badly wounded on the ground, bleeding to death. Spawn and Himiko approached the commission building. Himiko, still smiling, took out her paint can and left her mark on the burned wall. "We do not forget, we do not forgive." Before leaving, Spawn took one last look at Endeavor's mangled body. This is just the beginning. With Himiko by his side, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind not only a message, but a reminder that no one, not even the number 2 hero, was safe from his justice. Burnin sat on the edge of an ambulance, covered with a thermal blanket. Her hands trembled as she held a cup of coffee she hadn't touched since it was given to her. Her eyes, red-rimmed and tearful, couldn't focus on anything. The death of Endeavor, her mentor and leader, kept replaying in her mind like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. In front of her stood Nezu, Detective Naomasa, and All Might, each with serious and expectant expressions. The tension in the air was palpable. Burnin could barely speak, but he knew he had to. I don't know how to explain it," she began, her voice breaking. Spawn, isn't human. He can't be human." All Might leaned forward, his face filled with concern. Burnin, we know this is difficult, but we need you to tell us exactly what happened.
She swallowed, trying to calm her thoughts enough to speak.
We arrived at the headquarters because of a security alert. We knew someone was going to attack. We didn't know it would be him. How did it start? Naomasa asked, his tone gentle but firm. Burnin closed his eyes, tears beginning to fall again. Endeavor blew the door open. And then we saw him. He was huge, his cape. It looked alive. He was with someone else. A blonde girl. But he was all you could see. And Endeavor? Nezu asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and compassion. Burnin took a deep breath, trying to hold back his sobs.
He tried to confront it immediately. Flames everywhere, so intense I thought they'd burn the whole building down. But it didn't work. Nothing worked.
He brought his hands to his face, his fingers trembling. Spawn absorbed the flames like they were nothing. And then it was like all of Endeavor's fire didn't matter. Spawn caught him, and. She couldn't continue, her body trembling as she recalled the brutal scene. Naomasa approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Take your time, Burnin. We're here to listen. She nodded, but her voice became lower and shakier. He disarmed him. Literally. He ripped his arms off, and he started hitting him with them. All Might visibly tensed, his hands clenched into weak fists. Did he say anything? Why did he do this? Burnin nodded, his gaze lost in space.
He said it was personal. That he was doing it for his mother and for the life that had been stolen from him. I'd never seen such anger, but he seemed sad, as if this was something he'd been wanting to do for a long time.
Nezu tilted his head, his mind processing every word. And the girl who was with him? Did she do anything? No, Burnin replied, shaking his head. I was just watching him, but he seemed happy to be there, as if he shared his fury, but also his purpose. Naomasa jotted something down in her notebook before carefully asking. Burnin, what happened next? She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. He told me to run. To tell what I saw. I knew I couldn't do anything, so I did it. Silence fell over the group as they processed his words. All Might, his face grim, finally spoke. This isn't just an attack. It's a statement. Spawn isn't attacking randomly. All of this has a purpose. And it's personal, Naomasa added, closing her notebook with a heavy gesture. We don't know who she was before, but it's clear she has a direct connection to the Commission and Endeavor. Nezu, sitting silently, finally spoke in his characteristically calculating tone. If Spawn is acting out of personal reasons, we need to understand his story. Until we know who he really is, we won't be able to stop him. Burnin, still trembling, looked up at them. I don't think they can stop him. He's not like us. He's not like anything I've ever seen before. The words left a weight on the conversation that neither of them could ignore. Spawn wasn't just a physical threat. He was a symbol of something much deeper and darker lurking in the shadows of the hero system. The news of the death of Endeavor, the second highest-ranking hero, shook the country like an earthquake. The mainstream media reported the event solemnly, highlighting his sacrifice and dedication as a hero. However, they avoided mentioning details about how he died, likely under pressure from the Hero Commission, which was trying to control the media damage. However, in the darkest corners of the internet, leaked security videos began to circulate. The footage was shocking. The brutality with which Spawn took out Endeavor was captured in high definition, from the moment he ripped off his arms to the moment he beat him with them. The impact of these videos was immediate and polarizing. Public opinion was divided into two clearly opposing camps. Many were horrified by the video's graphic violence. Even those who weren't Endeavor fans viewed his death as an act of barbarism that couldn't be justified.
User 1. This is a heinous crime. Spawn isn't a hero, he's a monster. No one deserves to die like this, not even someone as controversial as Endeavor. User 2. If we allow this to go unpunished, what's next? Hero hunting in the streets. This has to stop. User 3. Heroes represent hope. This, Spawn, only brings fear and destruction.
On the other hand, some began to see Spawn as a symbol of extreme justice. For many, especially in marginalized areas and among those who had been victims of the corrupt hero system, his act was seen as necessary revenge against a rotten system.
User 4. Endeavor wasn't a hero. He was a bully who rose to power by trampling on others. Spawn only did what the system never wanted to do. User 5. This is what happens when heroes think they're untouchable. Someone had to put them in their place. User 6. Spawn isn't a villain. He's the only one doing something about the corruption of the system.
Endeavor's death and the circulation of the videos had a devastating effect on public confidence in the hero system. Many people began to question not only the hero's effectiveness, but also their morality. The Hero Commission attempted to maintain the narrative that Spawn was simply a dangerous villain, but the leaks of the videos complicated their control of the situation. In the most marginalized areas, where heroes rarely intervened, Spawn began to be seen as an almost mythical figure, an avenger bringing justice to the forgotten. However, in larger cities and among more affluent circles, fear of his brutality fueled a clamor for stricter measures against him. Social media was flooded with hashtags and heated debates.
Hashtag Justice for Endeavor called for the heroes to join forces to hunt down Spawn. Hashtag Spawn the Reckoning became a rallying cry for those who supported his actions. Hashtag Hero System Corruption exposed the flaws in the hero system, with users questioning what had driven someone like Spawn to act the way he did. Internally, the Hero Commission was in crisis. The continued attacks on their headquarters, coupled with Endeavor's death, represented a massive blow to both resources and morale. Security video leaks not only showed Spawn's brutality, but also the Commission's inability to stop him.
In a closed-door meeting, one of the Commission's top officials summed up the situation grimly. Spawn didn't just kill Endeavor, he's killing the public's trust in us. With Endeavor's death, the hero system faced its greatest challenge yet. Spawn had not only proven that even the most powerful weren't untouchable, but he had also started a national conversation about corruption and the system's flaws. For many, Spawn represented a threat. For others, a hope. But for all, it was a sign that the world of heroes was no longer the same. The news of Enji Todoroki's death came as an unexpected shock to his family. The scene in his home was tense, with his children gathered around the living room as they tried to process what the loss of the man who, although he was their father, had also been the cause of so much pain, meant to them. Rei Todoroki, still in the psychiatric hospital, received the news from a doctor who cautiously broke the news to him, fearing his reaction. However, what happened wasn't what he expected. When Rei heard that her husband had died, her first reaction was to remain silent. Her mind filled with memories. The scary nights, the screams, the pain-filled looks on her children's faces. But she didn't cry for Enji, she cried for something deeper. "Are we free?" he whispered, as if he couldn't believe it. The doctor, confused by her reaction, didn't know what to say, but she no longer expected an answer. Tears began to fall from her eyes as she brought a hand to her mouth, sobbing softly. "Not for him. Not for what happened to him," she said softly, more to herself than to the doctor. "I'm crying because, finally, his shadow will no longer haunt us." For the first time in years, Rei felt like she could breathe. Enji's death didn't erase the pain he'd caused, but it meant he no longer had power over his family. At the Todoroki house, the atmosphere was equally charged. Shoto sat on the couch, staring at a newspaper clipping reporting his father's death. Although the article didn't detail the circumstances, Shoto knew from rumors and leaked images that Spawn had been responsible. "So, someone finally stopped him," he said quietly, not looking at anyone in particular. Natsuo, his older brother, stood nearby, arms crossed and jaw clenched. Though he didn't say so, it was clear he was struggling with conflicting emotions. "I don't know if we should be sad," she finally said, breaking the silence. "How are we supposed to mourn someone who hurt us so much?" Fuyumi, the eldest of the siblings, tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes were filled with tears. "He was our father, yes, but I can't forget what he did to us, what he did to Mom." Natsuo finally let out some of his frustration. "You know what? I'm relieved. Yes, I said that. Relieved. Because we don't have to pretend he was a hero anymore. We don't have to carry his shadow anymore." Fuyumi looked at him sadly. "Natsuo." "No," he interrupted. "Why should we feel bad about this? He destroyed us. He destroyed Mom. He destroyed Shoto and Toya. He destroyed all of us, and all he did was justify it because he was a hero." Shoto remained silent, watching the argument between his brothers. Finally, he looked up. Spawn did what none of us could, he set us free.
His words left everyone speechless. It was a hard truth to accept, but undeniable. Rei, still in the hospital, asked to see her children after hearing the news. When they were reunited, her embrace was warmer than it had been in years. For the first time, there seemed to be a glimmer of hope in her eyes. I know nothing can erase the past, he told them, his voice soft but firm. But now we have the chance to start over. Shoto nodded slowly. Although he knew the road to healing would be long, he also knew that Endeavor's shadow no longer hung over them. Enji Todoroki's death didn't erase the damage he'd caused, but for his family, it meant the end of an era of suffering. Now, they could begin to rebuild, little by little, free from his control. When Dabi learned of his father Enji Todoroki's death, it wasn't through official channels or the League of Villains. It was through the videos circulating in the shadows of the internet, showing Endeavor's brutal death at the hands of Spawn. The raw and visceral scene left him paralyzed for a moment, his eyes glued to the screen as his mind processed what he had just seen. But what brought him out of his trance wasn't pain, not even sadness. It was a burning rage, a fury that consumed him completely. Spawn, you stole this from me. My revenge, my right. Dabi didn't talk to anyone in the League of Villains about his decision. Shigaraki was too focused on his own desire to win Himiko back and avenge All for One, and the others simply wouldn't understand what his father's death meant to him. Without warning, he left the League base, taking only what he needed. His mission was now personal. Find Spawn and confront him, no matter the consequences. Wreaking chaos has always been my specialty, he thought as he walked through the streets of a ruined city. And if that's what Spawn is drawn to, then I'll give him more chaos than he can handle. But as he planned his moves, doubts began to arise. He'd seen what Spawn did to Endeavor, the #1 hero, a man whose power and endurance were among the highest in the world. If his father, with all his skills, couldn't stand against Spawn, what chance did he have? My blue flames, they're hotter, more destructive, she thought, trying to convince herself. I can burn him, I can destroy him, it has to be enough. Deep down, though, he knew it wasn't just about strength. Spawn wasn't just about power, it was something darker, something beyond anything Dabi had ever faced before. But it doesn't matter, he told himself, his eyes burning with the same intensity as his flames. If I die facing him, at least he'll know I didn't just stand idly by. And if I manage to kill him, then the world will know that I was the only one who could destroy the monster. Dabi began his campaign of destruction, attacking government buildings, police stations, and any other location that might attract Spawn's attention. His blue flames lit up the night, leaving a trail of fire and chaos in their wake. Each attack was a direct message. I'm here, Spawn, come get me. Rumors quickly began to circulate. The heroes were too busy dealing with the instability caused by Endeavor's death and Spawn's attacks to focus on Dabi, which gave him the freedom to act without restraint.
But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before Spawn found him.
In an abandoned warehouse, Dabi sat in front of a small fire, his mind focused on the encounter he knew was coming. He had studied Spawn's videos, observed his movements, analyzed his strengths and weaknesses. He's not invincible, he told himself. He has to have a limit. And if I find it, I can take him down.
As the fire illuminated his face, Dabi let out a bitter laugh. In the end, it all comes down to this. My father died as the #2 hero, but not because of me. Spawn took that, and now I'm going to take it all back.
Dabi knew his path was dangerous, probably suicidal. But the rage he felt, the need to reclaim the revenge that had been stolen from him, drove him like never before.
And as the blue flames burned around him, only one thing was certain. The night he faced Spawn, the world would burn.
Kai Chisaki, known as Overhaul, sat in his office, surrounded by silence. The shelves once filled with reports and samples of his quirk-enhancing drug were now empty, and the normally spotless room was covered in dust. His suit was perfectly tailored, but his gloved hands trembled slightly as he held a financial report. The organization he had so carefully built, the Shihasaikai, was on the verge of collapse. With no funds and operations at a standstill, everything he had planned for years was crumbling before him. The reason was obvious. Spawn. Ever since this mysterious being had begun his campaign of terror against heroes, villains, and the Commission, fear had gripped the criminal underworld. Regular buyers of the quirk-enhancing drug had disappeared, fearful of being associated with any operation that might draw Spawn's attention.
Cowards, Overhaul muttered, slapping the report down on the table. All of them.
But deep down, he knew he couldn't blame them entirely. Rumors of Spawn's brutality were more than enough to make even the most hardened criminals reconsider their business dealings. Without funding, research into Ares' quirk, their greatest hope for creating a quirk-eliminating drug, had also come to a standstill. Ares was under close surveillance in her room, but without the necessary resources, she couldn't continue the experiments she so desperately needed to achieve her goal.
Overhaul clenched his fists, feeling frustration burning inside him.
All this because of that damn monster. He looked at an empty bottle on his desk, one of the last traces of the drug he had worked so hard to produce. It had been his key to controlling the underworld and advancing his vision of a world without quirks, but now it was just a reminder of how far he had fallen.
One of his most loyal subordinates, Chronostasis, quietly entered the office.
"Chief, things are getting worse. One of our last labs was abandoned by the staff. They're afraid Spawn will find them."
Overhaul closed his eyes, breathing deeply to maintain his composure.
"And the buyers, any progress?" Chronostasis shook his head. "No one wants to take the risk. Spawn has killed too many for anyone to dare to do business now." Overhaul's anger boiled over, and he slammed the table with both hands, causing the objects on it to shake.
All this for a monster who shouldn't even be here. Chronostasis took a step back, clearly uncomfortable with his leader's reaction.
"What do we do, boss? If we don't find a solution soon, we won't be able to stand."
Overhaul looked up, his mask hiding much of his expression, but his eyes shone with determination.
"No matter what happens, I won't let this failure define who I am. If Spawn wants to destroy everything we've built, then we'll face him. But before that, we'll finish what we started." Despite the circumstances, Overhaul wasn't willing to give up. His obsession with eliminating quirks from the world remained his primary motivation, and as long as he had Ares under his control, he knew he still had a card to play. "Double the security measures around Ares," he ordered, his voice icy. "And find someone, anyone, willing to fund our operations. If fear paralyzes them, then use it to our advantage." Chronostasis nodded, though he didn't seem to share his boss's optimism. "Yes, boss, I'll do what I can." Standing alone in his office, Overhaul stared at the emptiness surrounding him. The empire he had built was crumbling, but he wasn't about to let it end like this. "Spawn, I'm not going to let you take me down without a fight." His words echoed in the solitude of the room, a promise both to himself and to the monster who had unleashed chaos on the world of heroes and villains. Ares huddled in a corner of her small room, hugging her legs as tears streamed down her face. The past few days had been different. She was no longer taken to the lab, no longer forced to endure the pain of needles and cuts to extract her blood and marrow. But that momentary relief came at a cost. They had also stopped feeding her regularly.
Her small stomach growled with hunger, but it was the emptiness in her heart that hurt the most. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the dark thoughts that were invading her.
"Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone, help me."
She knew it was a futile wish. No one had come before, so why would they come now? But despite that, she continued to wish for it with all her might, as if that plea might reach someone, something, that could save her from her prison.
Meanwhile, Spawn flew over Musudafu City, his red cloak stretching out like a shadow that covered the rooftops. Himiko slept soundly in the abandoned church, leaving Izuku to his solitary vigil. Though he didn't need to patrol, he found a strange comfort in the act, a way to channel his unwavering thirst for justice during the cold November nights. That's when he felt it. A whisper in the darkness, a plea laden with desperation and purity. A voice that echoed not in his ears, but in his soul. Through his connection to hell, Spawn could sense tormented souls, those filled with guilt and sin. But this soul was different. An innocent girl. The feeling was like a beacon in the darkness, a faint but persistent light shining in the vast sea of suffering that was the world. He didn't need to think twice. He altered his course, following that plea with precision. Spawn landed silently in front of an abandoned building, one of the places he'd learned to recognize as underworld lairs. The sense of the girl's presence was stronger here. He spread his cloak, allowing it to transform into a series of chains that smashed through the front door with a crash. Inside, the corridors were dark, but Spawn didn't need light to see. He followed the faint presence of the soul that had called to him, moving forward with heavy footsteps that echoed like a drum in the stillness of the place. Finally, he reached a small, locked room. With a gesture, the chains flung themselves toward the door, tearing it from its hinges and revealing the shrunken figure of a white-haired girl. Eri raised her head at the sound. Her large red eyes met Spawn's towering figure. At first, fear filled her. His form was intimidating, like a monster from a nightmare. But then, something in his glowing green eyes told her he wasn't like the others who had hurt her. "Who are you?" Eri whispered in a trembling voice. Spawn slowly knelt down, trying not to scare her further. "Someone who heard your call." Eri didn't fully understand his words, but the warmth in his tone broke something inside her. Tears began to flow again as she staggered to her feet and took a few steps toward him.
"Are you going to take me out of here?" "Yes." The answer was firm, an unbreakable promise.
Spawn held out his cloak, carefully wrapping it around Eri, protecting her from the cold and fear that had consumed her. As he lifted her into his arms, Eri, for the first time in a long time, felt like someone saw her, that someone was willing to fight for her. As they walked away from the building, Spawn whispered, more to himself than to Eri.
"No one will hurt you again. I promise." However, chaos erupted when the remaining, loyal members of the Shi Hasaikai arrived at the scene, alerted by broken doors and destroyed locks.
"Eri, I need you to close your eyes and cover your ears. No matter what happens, don't open them." "Understood." Eri, though scared, nodded quickly and obeyed. Spawn let the cloak cover her completely, sealing her from the outside world. The loyal Shi Hasaikai guards entered the warehouse, armed and ready to defend their base. However, what they faced was not human. Spawn's chains lashed out, slicing through bodies with lethal precision. Spawn's red cloak, like a living creature, extended and transformed, trapping and tearing at the men who tried to approach. Screams filled the warehouse as the guards fell one by one, unable to match Spawn's brutality and speed. Every blow, every movement was relentless, a display of strength and fury that left no room for mercy. As the last guard fell, Spawn turned toward the warehouse exit, knowing there was still a confrontation to come. Kai Chisaki was waiting outside. His posture was calm, but his eyes revealed suppressed fury and despair. His goal, his vision of a world without quirks, was on the verge of collapse, and he knew this monster who had destroyed his men was the reason. "So you're finally here," Overhaul said, his voice filled with contempt. "I don't know who or what you are, but you're not getting out of here alive." With a sweep of his hands, Overhaul dismantled the concrete from the floor and walls around him, reforming it into sharpened stakes that he hurled at Spawn with deadly speed. Spawn, without moving an inch, let his cloak and chains do the work. The stakes were deflected or destroyed before they could touch him, and he fell uselessly to the ground. "That's all," Spawn said in his deep, defiant tone. Overhaul snarled and reformed the concrete into a gigantic wall that attempted to crush him, but Spawn destroyed it with a swipe of his chains, inching toward him with terrifying calm. "You can't defeat me," Overhaul shouted, raising more stakes and throwing them frantically. "I'm the only one who can fix this broken world." Spawn finally reached him, ignoring all the attacks Overhaul threw at him. With a swift movement, he caught him in his chains, lifting him above his head as if he weighed nothing. "You are as fragile as the system you try to control," Spawn said, his voice thick with contempt. Without warning, he brought him down hard on his knee, splitting his body in two with a shattering crunch. Overhaul screamed in pain before falling silent, his body broken and crumpled on the ground. Spawn stared at Overhaul's limp body for a moment before turning and walking away from the warehouse. The cloak protecting Eri lifted, revealing the girl, who still had her eyes closed and her hands over her ears. "Eri," he said softly, his tone completely different from the one he had used with Overhaul. Eri slowly opened her eyes, looking at Spawn cautiously. Is Is everything okay? Spawn nodded, extending his hand toward her. Yes, everything's fine now. Eri tentatively took his hand, and Spawn carefully lifted it, wrapping his cloak around it again for protection. Before disappearing into the night with her, he left one last message carved into the concrete of the warehouse. We do not forget, we do not forgive. And with that, Spawn and Eri disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a warehouse filled with death and an even more fractured system. When Spawn entered the abandoned church with Eri in his arms, his towering figure seemed almost gentle, as if he knew the child he carried needed more than strength to feel safe. The cloak wrapped around her was carefully parted, revealing Eri, who was still clutching Izuku's chest with her small hands. Himiko, awakened by the footsteps, slowly got up from the mattress, her sleepy eyes shining with curiosity at the sight of the little girl.
Who is she? He asked, walking toward them while rubbing his eyes.
Her name is Eri, Spawn replied in his deep tone, carefully placing the girl on the mattress. I found her in an abandoned Yakuza warehouse. Eri sat shyly, watching Himiko with curious but cautious eyes. It was then that her stomach growled, a sound so loud in the silence of the night that it made Himiko and Spawn exchange glances.
Are you hungry? Izuku asked, kneeling in front of Eri. Eri nodded shyly, her cheeks reddening as she looked down.
Yeah, Himiko, always quick to act, began searching through the cans of food Momo had brought a while back. Finally, she found a can of preserved fruit.
This will do, he said excitedly, taking out a can opener and carefully opening the can. When Himiko handed the can and a bottle of water to Eri, the girl took it with both hands, but stopped before eating. Her large red eyes looked at Himiko and Spawn with a mixture of doubt and shyness.
Can I really eat? She asked softly, her tone filled with an innocence that broke both of their hearts. Himiko froze, her eyes widening as she processed what she'd just heard. Spawn, though more controlled, clenched his fists slightly, his suppressed rage reflected in the glow of his green eyes.
Eri, Himiko said softly, kneeling beside her. Of course you can eat. You don't need to ask permission for that.
Spawn nodded, his voice softer than usual. You're safe here, Eri. No one will tell you what you can or can't do.
Eri looked at the can and then back at them, as if she still couldn't believe it. Finally, she took a piece of fruit and bit into it carefully. Her face lit up at the taste of something sweet after so long. Himiko smiled, her fangs slightly visible as she watched the girl eat.
Is it good? Eri nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. It's delicious. As the girl ate eagerly, Himiko and Spawn exchanged glances. They both knew that caring for Eri meant more than protecting her physically. They would have to teach her what it meant to live without fear, what it meant to be treated with love and respect.
And even though the world was dark and dangerous, at that moment, under the rickety roof of the abandoned church, there was a small ray of hope.
Eri, for the first time in a long time, smiled as she ate the preserved fruit. Her smile was small, shy, but genuine. Himiko, unable to resist how adorable she looked, approached with open arms, trying to hug her. You're so cute, Himiko exclaimed, but the moment Himiko tried to put her arms around her, Eri pushed her away with unexpected force and began to cry. No, don't touch me, she cried between sobs. Himiko, surprised, stepped back, looking at Izuku in confusion. Izuku watched the little girl, her heartbreaking cries filling the church. He knelt in front of her, keeping his distance, but with a firm, calm voice, he spoke.
Eri, what's wrong? Why don't you want to be hugged?
Eri raised her face, her red eyes filling with tears as she tried to explain herself between sobs. Because I don't want to make her disappear, like I did with my dad. Himiko and Izuku exchanged a look of surprise and sadness before Eri continued, her voice breaking. My quirk is cursed. When it activated, I made my dad disappear. My mom said I was a monster and sold me to Kaichisaki. Himiko brought a hand to her mouth, horrified by what she was hearing. Izuku, however, maintained his composure. Slowly, he approached Eri and wrapped her in a gentle but firm hug. I'm not a monster, but I'm not like other people either, he told her calmly. Your quirk can't hurt me. Eri's quirk instinctively activated upon feeling the contact, but her powers, though intense, were unable to affect a spawn from hell. The black and white markings on Izuku's suit glowed slightly, but he didn't let go of the little girl. Eri, realizing that nothing had happened, began to cry even harder, this time out of relief at not having hurt someone for the first time in her life. Izuku held her, letting her cry until her voice calmed. "Eri," Izuku finally said, his voice soft but laced with purpose. "Do you want this curse to go away?" Eri looked up at him, her eyes large and full of tears.
Can you really make her disappear?" Izuku nodded.
"I can try, but only if you want." Eri, after a moment of hesitation, nodded forcefully, her small voice echoing in the empty space. "Yes, I want it to disappear." Izuku extended one of his hands, from which emerged a hellish chain wrapped in black and green fire. With precise, almost ceremonial movements, he directed the chain toward Eri. Himiko watched silently, her heart torn between worry and hope. The chain gently touched Eri, and a dark glow enveloped her small body. Izuku tugged on the chain, as if he were pulling out something invisible. Little by little, a glowing, pulsing energy began to flow out of Eri, writhing as if struggling to stay.
Finally, Izuku ripped out the essence of her quirk, a manifestation both bright and dark, and destroyed it with a squeeze of his gloved hands. Eri's small horn began to disappear, fading away along with her quirk. When it was all over, Eri felt lighter, as if a weight she'd carried her entire life had been lifted. She touched her forehead where the horn used to be, her eyes filled with wonder. "Isn't he here anymore?" she asked in a whisper.
Izuku nodded, his green eyes shining softly. "He's gone. You'll never have to fear him again." Eri threw herself at him, this time of her own volition. Her small arms wrapped around Izuku as tears fell again, but this time, they were of relief and gratitude.
Himiko, watching everything, felt her own eyes fill with tears. Although the world they lived in was filled with darkness, in that moment, she saw a tiny spark of light.
That night, under the roof of the abandoned church, Eri lay between Himiko and Spawn. The little girl, accustomed to the cold of her old life, snuggled closer, hugging Izuku's body as she felt the softness of Himiko's hair.
Spawn's body, though dark and seemingly hard, emitted a comforting warmth that enveloped her like a warm blanket. Meanwhile, Himiko, always full of energy and vitality, gently held Eri's hand, her breathing calm as she began to fall asleep.
Eri closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythms of their breathing. For the first time in a long time, there was no fear in her heart, only a strange sense of calm. As she snuggled a little closer, her mind wandered to a thought she'd never considered before. "Is this what it's like to have parents?" she murmured to herself, low enough so no one could hear. Eri didn't fully understand what family meant, but in that moment, surrounded by Izuku's warmth and Himiko's closeness, she began to imagine it. Maybe, just maybe, this was what it felt like to be loved and protected. With that thought, a small sigh of relief escaped her lips as she allowed herself to fall into a deep, peaceful sleep, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Although the world outside was cruel and dangerous, inside that church, under the protection of Spawn and Himiko, Eri found a refuge she never thought possible. Eri woke up to a sweet, delicious aroma filling the air. Her eyes fluttered as she slowly sat up on the mattress. In front of her, Himiko was cooking something in a pan, held over the hellish flames that erupted from Izuku's hands. "Good morning, Eri," Himiko said with a radiant smile as she skillfully flipped a pancake. "You're just in time for breakfast." Eri watched curiously. She'd never seen a scene like it. A frying pan over seemingly unnatural flames and a blonde girl working with such enthusiasm. On the table in front of her was a plate of freshly made pancakes and a steaming cup of a dark, fragrant liquid. Himiko turned around, placing another pancake on Eri's plate before sitting next to her with her own plate.
"These are called pancakes," Himiko said, pointing at the fluffy food, "and that right there is hot chocolate. It's delicious." Eri looked at her plate with big, curious eyes. "Can I really eat this?" she asked, still unsure.
Izuku, who was sitting across the table, nodded. "Of course you can. This is for you." Eri took a small bite, her eyes lighting up at the sweet, fluffy flavor of the pancake. Then, she took a sip of the hot chocolate, and a shy smile appeared on her face. "It's very good," he said in a low voice.
Himiko smiled widely. "I knew you'd like it." As they ate, Himiko and Spawn began introducing themselves. Himiko was the first to speak, with her characteristic energy.
"Well, I'm Himiko Toga. I'm the one who makes life around here fun," she said, winking at Eri. "And that big guy who looks all serious is Izuku Midoriya, but you can also call him Spawn."
Izuku nodded, confirming what Himiko had said. "You can call me whatever you want, Eri."
Eri watched them intently, alternating her gaze between the two as she took another bite of her pancake. "Thank you for all of this," he finally said, his voice soft but full of gratitude.
Himiko leaned towards her, smiling warmly. "You don't have to thank us. You're part of our little family now."
Eri blinked, surprised by the words. "Family." Izuku nodded. "Yes, you'll be safe here, Eri. Always." For the first time in a long time, Eri felt like she truly belonged somewhere. As she finished her breakfast, she looked at Himiko and Spawn with a small smile. Maybe, she thought, life wouldn't always be the same as before. Maybe, she had finally found a place to call home. The church door creaked as Momo entered, carrying a bag full of clothes and some food she'd brought for Himiko and Izuku. Although the place was always dim, something was different this time, the soft sound of children's laughter. "Himiko," Momo called as she walked inside. Himiko appeared from around a corner, a big smile on her face. "Momo, you came just in time. I have to go buy some supplies, and I was thinking about you." Before Momo could respond, her eyes fell on a small figure sitting on the mattress. It was a white-haired girl, wrapped in a blanket, playing with a piece of wood she seemed to have picked up from the floor. The scene left her momentarily bewildered. "And her?" Momo asked, gently pointing at the girl. Himiko, still smiling, walked over to the mattress and knelt beside the girl. "This is Eri. Izuku rescued her yesterday morning. She's part of our family now."
Eri, hearing them talk about her, looked up. Her red eyes met Momo's, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate, hugging the blanket a little tighter.
Momo approached slowly, her voice calm. "Hi, Eri, I'm Momo. It's nice to meet you." Eri looked at her shyly, but after a moment, she murmured, "Hello." The warmth in Momo's voice seemed to reassure the little girl, who lowered her guard enough to reveal the piece of wood she was holding. "I'm playing." Momo smiled softly, watching as Eri turned the wood in her hands like a toy. Even though the place was modest, there was something comforting in the way Eri seemed to be finding some peace. "It's a nice game," Momo replied, sitting next to her. "Would you like me to bring you some toys next time?"
Eri blinked, surprised by the question. "Really? Of course," Momo said sincerely. "I promise."
Eri nodded slowly, a small smile appearing on her face. Himiko, watching the interaction, couldn't help but laugh. "He seems to like you, Momo." Momo smiled, looking at Eri tenderly. "I think I like her too." After a while, Himiko stood up, reaching out to Momo. "Okay, time to go. We need supplies, and I want to show you a place I discovered last time." Momo nodded, though her gaze remained fixed on Eri. "I'll be back soon, Eri. And I'll bring you something special."
Eri, wrapped in her blanket, raised her hand and waved it timidly.
"Goodbye, Momo." As Momo and Himiko left the church, Momo couldn't help but feel moved by the little girl. In her mind, she was already planning what she could bring her next time, something to remind her that there was still goodness in the world, even amidst so much darkness. With Himiko and Momo gone, Eri walked through the church with Spawn. Her small, bare feet tapped softly against the worn floor as she explored the shadows of the place. Despite its disrepair, the church held something mysterious about it that piqued her curiosity. Izuku followed close behind, his red cloak slowly billowing as if responding to the girl's movements. "Why are you wearing that mask?" Eri asked suddenly, turning to him with her head tilted slightly. Izuku stopped, surprised by the question. "It's to protect me." Eri looked at him curiously, not accepting the answer. "About what?" Izuku searched for the right words, but before he could answer, Eri continued speaking. "Don't you like how you look?" Izuku tried to change the subject, looking towards one of the old church pews. "Do you want me to show you another place here? There's a room with beautiful stained glass windows." But Eri wasn't distracted. Instead of answering, she stretched her arms out toward him, showing the numerous scars that marked her skin. Some were small, others deeper, but all were testament to the pain she had suffered at Overhaul's hands. "I have things I don't like too," she said softly, looking down at her own arms. "But you make me feel like no one can hurt me anymore."
Eri's words resonated with Izuku. His mask, part of his hellish suit, seemed to react as if it understood the moment. Slowly, it began to recede, sliding backward as if alive, revealing his burned and disfigured face.
Eri looked at his face intently, but she showed no fear or revulsion. Instead, she raised a small hand and gently touched Izuku's scars, her gaze filled with the innocence only a child could possess.
"You have scars too," he said softly, his tone heavy with understanding. Izuku, surprised by her reaction, nodded slowly. "Yes, I have them." Eri smiled shyly as she continued to caress his face, as if she wanted to comfort him. "It doesn't matter. You're still you." Izuku felt something warm in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Eri's words, simple but sincere, carried a weight that pierced all the layers of darkness surrounding him. "Thank you, Eri," he finally said, his voice softer than ever. Eri walked over and hugged him, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Izuku reciprocated the gesture gently, letting his cloak wrap around them both like a protective blanket. At that moment, amidst a ruined church and a world filled with pain, two scarred souls found mutual solace that seemed to heal something much deeper than their physical wounds. Himiko walked briskly through the city streets, wearing her parka jacket with the hood covering her blonde hair. Beside her, Momo carried a list of the items they needed, while Himiko pointed out things that looked useful. "An electric cooking plate would be great," Himiko commented, pointing to one in a store. "It's not that I don't love watching Izuku use his flames for everything, but I think it would be nice not to always rely on him." Momo nodded, adding the electric plate to the shopping basket. "And we also need an electric coffee maker. It might be useful for heating water without any problems." As they browsed the shops, Himiko continued to suggest items: a portable shower, an electric heater for cold nights, and even some basic kitchen utensils. Although Himiko tried to keep her tone light, Momo could see the concern in her eyes. She wanted Eri to be comfortable, something she'd probably never experienced before.
In one of the stores, as Momo browsed the shelves, her gaze fell on a small teddy bear. It was soft, with bright eyes and a red scarf. She remembered Eri playing with a piece of wood in church and how that image had touched her deeply.
"I think Eri will like this," Momo said, holding the plush and showing it to Himiko. Himiko paused for a moment, looking at the teddy bear before smiling. "Yes. I think she'll love it. She's never had anything like this, I'm sure." Momo added the stuffed animal to her mental list as the two continued searching for some clothes for Eri. They found simple dresses, soft pajamas, and some comfortable t-shirts, all in her size. As they browsed the shelves, Momo couldn't help but ask about the little girl. "Himiko, can you tell me more about Eri? How did she come to you?" Himiko lowered her voice, making sure no one could hear them, as her hands ran through a padded jacket for Eri.
"Izuku rescued her from a horrible place. She was being held captive and used by someone named Kai Chisaki, or Overhaul, as he's known."
Momo felt a chill at the mention of the name, having read reports about him and his criminal activities. "Used?" Himiko nodded, her normally carefree face showing an unusual seriousness.
"He hurt her, extracted her blood and marrow to make drugs. Eri thinks her quirk is cursed because she once accidentally hurt her dad when it activated. And her mom sold her to that monster." Momo brought a hand to her mouth, horrified. "That's inhuman." Himiko nodded, her expression hardening. "She is. But Izuku did something for her. He took away that quirk, that curse, as she calls it. Now she's just a little girl who deserves to be happy." Momo took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination.
"We will do everything possible to make her happy." Himiko smiled, returning to her usual tone. "Exactly, and all this," he said, pointing to the things they had bought, "is a good start." Momo nodded with a smile, looking at the teddy bear she had chosen. "Yes, it is." The church door creaked open, announcing the return of Himiko and Momo. Izuku, who was sitting on an old bench next to Eri, looked up as the little girl turned curiously toward the newcomers. Himiko was carrying bags full of supplies, and Momo was carrying a smaller bag, holding it carefully. "We're back," Himiko said with her typical energy, dropping her bags on the floor. "And we brought some amazing stuff." Momo smiled softly as she took a small package out of the bag she was carrying. She knelt in front of Eri, holding the teddy bear in both hands. "Eri, this is for you," he said in a warm voice. Eri's eyes widened at the sight of the plush toy. It was soft, with a red scarf that looked brand new. She looked at Momo, then at the bear, unsure of how to react. "Is it for me?" she asked timidly, hugging the blanket she was still wearing. Momo nodded, offering it to him with a smile. "Yes, it's all yours." Eri reached out her small hands, carefully taking the bear, as if it were something fragile and precious. Her fingers caressed the soft texture, and a small smile appeared on her face as she hugged it to her chest. "It's soft," she whispered, looking at the stuffed animal as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. Himiko, who had been watching the scene, took out some of the new clothes from another bag. "That's not all. Look at this, Eri. We brought new clothes for you." Eri looked at Himiko curiously as she held out a small dress and a padded jacket. The little girl carefully placed the stuffed animal beside her and approached, touching the fabric with her hands. "Is it for me too?" he asked, his eyes shining. "Of course," Himiko replied, crouching down to his eye level. "This is all yours." Eri looked at the clothes and then at the three people in front of her, Himiko, Momo, and Izuku. Her eyes began to fill with tears as a shy smile lit up her face. "Thank you. Thank you for everything," she said softly, hugging first the clothes and then her teddy bear. Himiko, excited, couldn't resist and hugged her gently, taking care not to scare her this time. Eri didn't push her away, letting Himiko wrap her in a warm embrace. Momo, watching the scene, felt moved. She approached and gently stroked Eri's head. "You don't have to be thankful for anything, Eri. You deserve all this and more." Izuku, though he said nothing, watched with satisfaction as the little girl found a bit of joy in the midst of her life marked by pain.
Izuku, Himiko, and Momo worked as a team to install the new appliances in the church. Izuku, with his superhuman strength, lifted the heaviest items with ease, while Himiko adjusted wires and plugs with almost childlike enthusiasm. Momo supervised, making sure everything was working properly.
"The shower's ready," Himiko exclaimed, adjusting the handheld showerhead and testing the controls.
Eri, sitting nearby, watched everything with curious eyes, hugging her small teddy bear. When Himiko turned on the hot water a little, steam began to rise, and Eri leaned forward in fascination.
"What's that?" she asked innocently. "It's hot water, Eri," Himiko replied with a big smile, "for bathing." Eri looked at her in surprise, her big eyes full of disbelief. "Can you take a hot bath?" The question, so simple yet so heartbreaking, made Himiko and Momo stop. Himiko, trying to keep her tone light, nodded as she adjusted the water flow. "Of course. It's much better than cold water," but Eri looked down, hugging her bear tighter. "With overhaul. They only threw a bucket of cold water on me when I was dirty. They never used hot water." The confession fell like a stone in the atmosphere. Momo, who was adjusting the coffee maker's cord, dropped everything she was doing and quickly approached Eri. She knelt in front of the girl, and before she could stop herself, wrapped her in a hug. "That's not fair," Momo exclaimed, unable to hold back her tears. "No child should have to go through something like that." Eri, though surprised, didn't reject the hug. She felt Momo's body trembling, the tears falling as she tried to process the pain emanating from the little girl's story. Himiko watched silently, biting her lip to keep from crying as well. Although she was used to the cruelties of the world, hearing what Eri had suffered was still difficult for her to accept. Izuku, for his part, clenched his fists tightly, his eyes shining with suppressed fury.
"Eri," Momo said softly, pulling away slightly to look her in the eyes. "You'll never have to go through anything like that again. I promise."
Eri nodded slowly, her own eyes filling with tears as she hugged her bear again. After calming down, Momo joined the others in finishing installing the appliances, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she'd heard. She looked at Izuku, who was working silently with relentless determination, and at Himiko, who was trying to keep the atmosphere light with her jokes and laughter. They too were crushed by this world, Momo thought as she adjusted the heater. People the system rejected because they didn't fit the mold it expected of them. Izuku, with his hellish appearance and thirst for justice, was someone the world feared and rejected. Himiko, with her chaotic energy and past neglect, had been labeled a monster from a young age. And now, Eri, a girl who had been treated like a tool, was burdened with a pain no child should ever know. But despite everything, here they were, together. They weren't a conventional family, but in this abandoned church, they had created something that felt like home. Momo sighed, looking at Eri, who was playing with her bear near the newly installed heater. Maybe this world doesn't deserve them. But they have each other. And I'll do everything I can to help them. With that thought, Momo stood up and continued working, more determined than ever to protect this little corner of hope they had built together. That night, Eri slept cuddled with her new teddy bear, dressed in one of the soft pajamas Himiko and Momo had brought her. For the first time in a long time, she seemed completely at peace, like a little girl who had finally found a home and people who loved her. A month later, the abandoned church was enveloped in a warm and welcoming atmosphere, something almost impossible to imagine in such a dark and cold place. Himiko was radiant, a permanent smile on her face as she watched Eri play near the makeshift table containing the gifts Momo had brought earlier. For Himiko, this night was a miracle. For half a year, she'd spent believing she'd never experience a night like this again. But now, here they were. Izuku back, stronger than ever, and with a little new member in his family, Eri. Every now and then, Himiko pinched her cheek, reassuring herself that this wasn't all a dream. The warmth in her chest was as real as the soft crunch of the food Momo had left for them. A simple but meaningful Christmas dinner. Although Momo couldn't stay, her gesture had touched Himiko and Eri deeply. Izuku, watching silently, decided to add something special to the evening. His red cape, vivid and ever-changing, began to transform before Himiko and Eri's eyes. Within seconds, it took the shape of a Christmas tree. Izuku's hellish flames, glowing in shades of red, green, and black, began to dance across the cape, illuminating the room with a warm, magical glow. Eri, who was sitting nearby, let out a small gasp. "It's a Christmas tree." Himiko, watching the spectacle with shining eyes, quickly stood up and hugged Izuku from behind. "You're amazing," she exclaimed, laughing with joy. "I knew you were creative, but this is perfect." Izuku, though he didn't say anything, let a small smile form on his lips under his mask. Seeing Himiko and Eri happy was all he needed that night. Eri, excited about Izuku's Christmas tree, headed toward the gifts Momo had left earlier. Each one was carefully wrapped, with a tag bearing Eri's name written in elegant calligraphy. "Can I really open them?" Eri asked, looking at Himiko and Izuku with excited eyes. "Of course," Himiko replied, kneeling beside him. Eri began to open the gifts carefully, as if afraid of tearing the paper. The first was a red dress with a small bow, perfect for the season. The second was a set of colored pencils and a sketchbook. And the third, the one that excited her the most, was a small doll with white hair and a blue dress. "It's beautiful," Eri whispered, hugging the doll to her chest. Himiko, moved by Eri's reaction, hugged her gently. "Momo really thought of you." That night, as the church filled with laughter and the glow of Izuku's hell tree, the three shared something that seemed impossible in their lives: peace and joy. Himiko, sitting near the tree, held Izuku's hand as they watched Eri play with her new gifts. "I never thought I'd have a Christmas like this again." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her smile was genuine. Izuku gently squeezed her hand, his green eyes shining in the glow of the flames. "This time, we won't lose anything." And with those words, the three of them, a makeshift but united family, continued enjoying a night none of them would forget. Himiko and Eri were wearing red wool sweaters, a gift Momo had given them for Christmas. Eri was especially excited about her sweater, touching the soft fabric as she rested next to Himiko on the mattress. The little girl couldn't take her eyes off the Christmas tree Izuku had molded with his cape, illuminating the church with its dancing flames of red, green, and black. Himiko, lying next to Eri, gently stroked the girl's white hair, enjoying the quiet moment. For both of them, this Christmas was more than a celebration, it was a reaffirmation of how far they had come together. "Do you like it, Eri?" Himiko asked softly, looking at the little girl's dreamy face. Eri nodded, hugging her new doll to her chest. I really like it, Mom.
Himiko's heart skipped a beat upon hearing those words. She tenderly caressed Eri's cheek before getting up from the mattress and walking over to Izuku, who was standing there staring at the tree.
How do you make everything so perfect? Himiko asked, her voice soft but full of emotion. Izuku turned his head slightly, his face marked but serene under the dim light of the tree.
I don't know if it's perfect, but it's the best I can do for you. Himiko smiled, her eyes sparkling as she leaned closer. Without saying a word, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him with the same love she'd shared with him last Christmas, when she thought she'd never have him by her side again.
The kiss was warm and comforting, a reminder of what they'd overcome together. Izuku held her gently, letting the layer of the tree spread a little further, enveloping them both in a protective glow. From the mattress, Eri looked at Himiko and Izuku, her eyes beginning to close as sleep overcame her. Even though she was on the verge of sleep, she couldn't help but reflect on what she felt in her small heart.
To her, Izuku had become her father, strong, protective, and always there when she needed him. Himiko was her mother, loving, fun, and always ready to comfort her. And Momo was like an aunt, someone who brought gifts, smiles, and a sense of security. As she hugged her doll and her breathing became calmer, a thought crossed her mind before sleep completely claimed her. Now I have a family. The church, though dilapidated and dark, was for Eri the warmest place in the world, filled with love and hope. And with that feeling in her heart, she drifted off into a peaceful sleep, embraced by a peace she had never known before. Momo was in her room, surrounded by screens and cables as she worked on the hard drives Himiko and Izuku had given her. For weeks, she had been trying to decipher the information, knowing it contained critical data on the Hero Commission's corruption. Finally, after hours of effort, she managed to access the most protected folder. The file was labeled with a cold, methodical name, Operation Cauterization, Final Report. Momo, filled with curiosity and nervousness, opened the file. What she found inside took her breath away. The report was detailed, with names, dates, and steps executed with military precision. Every word I read was like a punch in the gut. Assigned Agent Keigo Takami, Hawks. Aim: neutralization of the Midoriya family. Reasoning: preventing critical information leaks about the Hero All Might's weakness. Method: discreet disposal through a domestic accident. The following paragraph described, in chilling detail, how the operation was carried out. Execution: the assigned agent entered the apartment when no one was supposed to be present, though complications arose when it was discovered that the target's mother was inside. The target's mother, Inko Midoriya, was neutralized by a knife to the heart to ensure immediate silence. Explosives were planted at structural points within the apartment. The explosion was remotely detonated, simulating a gas leak. Momo brought a hand to her mouth, horrified. The words were clinical, devoid of humanity, as if they were describing an experiment rather than the destruction of a life. Hawks' name was plastered all over the report. He had been the direct executor of the operation, following orders from the commission. The idea that such a renowned hero could have been responsible for such a heinous act was inconceivable. Momo continued reading, though every word was like a dagger in her mind. There were audio recordings, emails, and a transcript of the meeting where the operation was authorized. There was even a personal message from the operations leader congratulating Hawks on his impeccable efficiency. Finally, she came across an attached video. She hesitated before playing it, but knew she needed to watch it. The recording showed security footage from inside the Midoriya's apartment. She saw Inko bustling around in the kitchen when Hawks entered with a hidden knife. The cold, calculating way he acted made Momo look away, tears falling from her eyes. Momo closed the screens, her heart pounding. The revelations had left her devastated, but also furious. The commission hadn't just cruelly eliminated Inko Midoriya, but they'd done so to protect their own corrupt agenda. He stood up from his chair, taking a deep breath to calm himself. This cannot be left silent, the world must know the truth. But she knew that revealing this information would also endanger those involved, Izuku, Himiko, and even herself. She had to act carefully, but she also knew she couldn't ignore what she'd discovered. Momo looked at the screen one more time before turning it off completely. Izuku's words echoed in her mind. We do not forget. We do not forgive. Now, More than ever, she understood the weight of those words. Momo arrived at the church in the middle of the night, carrying a backpack with a laptop. The atmosphere inside the shelter was peaceful. Eri was sleeping soundly under the warm blankets on the mattress, cuddling her teddy bear. Himiko, sitting nearby, greeted Momo with a smile.
"Did you bring anything interesting?" Himiko asked, leaning forward curiously. Momo nodded, but her face showed concern. "Yes, but it's not good. I need both of you to see it." Izuku, who was sitting silently watching the church, stood up and walked towards them. "What did you find?" Momo placed the laptop on a makeshift table and turned it on.
"It's about what happened with your mother in the apartment. I found the records on the commission's hard drives." The silence deepened in the church as Momo navigated to the file and opened the video. Himiko took Momo's hand, sensing the nervousness that enveloped her, while Izuku remained motionless, his eyes bright and focused.
As the video began to play, the atmosphere changed drastically. It showed Inko Midoriya in the kitchen, doing something as mundane as preparing dinner. Then Hawks entered the scene, his demeanor relaxed but his gaze cold. What followed was a calculated and brutal act. Izuku didn't take his eyes off the screen as he watched his mother coldly murdered. His body began to tremble, and his hands clenched into fists. Himiko, horrified, placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, but he didn't react. When the video ended, Momo turned off the computer, looking at Izuku with concern. "Izuku. I'm sorry." Izuku remained silent for a few moments, his heavy breathing filling the air. Finally, he turned around, his eyes glowing with a deep green glow. "Hawks," he muttered in a voice filled with suppressed rage.
"Izuku, wait," Momo tried to say, standing up. But Izuku was already moving. His cloak began to flutter like a living thing, and in an instant, he was out of the church, taking off into the night sky with terrifying speed. Himiko watched wide-eyed as Izuku disappeared into the night, taking a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She looked down at the mattress where Eri was still sleeping, oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. "We can't leave him alone." Momo nodded, quickly grabbing her computer. "We know where he's going. Hawks will be somewhere working for the commission, but, can we stop him?" Himiko stood up, her expression determined. "I'm not sure, but if anyone can talk to Izuku, it's me." They both knew what happened next would change everything. Meanwhile, in the dark sky, Izuku flew with a clear purpose: to find Hawks and confront him for what he had done. The city was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of early January. Hawks, known as a swift, cunning, and exemplary hero, patrolled the streets from the sky, his majestic figure illuminated by the city lights. For the citizens, he was a sign of safety. But that night, something dark and terrifying lurked in the shadows. Suddenly, Hawks felt a devastating impact on his side, a blow that threw him hard to the ground. He crashed against the asphalt, rolling several meters before coming to a stop. Dazed, he slowly got up, his wings spreading as he searched for his assailant. That's when she saw him. Spawn, his towering figure shrouded in shadow, with green eyes that glowed like beacons of anger in the darkness. Hawks, keeping his composure despite the fear that was beginning to take hold of him, tried to reason. "Wait, I know who you are, but I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. I'm Hawks, a hero. I help people, I'm not like Endeavor." Spawn didn't respond. His cape billowed around him like a living beast, and his chains whipped about, emitting sparks of hellfire. His silence was more terrifying than any threat. Hawks, seeing that he wouldn't get an answer, made a decision. His feathers sharpened into razor blades and shot out toward Spawn. However, the monster's chains were faster, catching them in midair and tearing them to pieces before they could even get close. Before Hawks could attempt to take flight, Spawn launched himself at him with inhuman speed. He grabbed Hawks by the wings, lifting him above his head. Hawks struggled desperately, but Spawn's strength was overwhelming. "Wait! You don't have to do this," Hawks shouted, his voice filled with panic. Spawn, with a brutal movement, ripped Hawks' wings from his back, letting out a heart-rending scream that echoed throughout the street. Hawks fell to the ground, screaming in pain as his blood soaked the asphalt. He tried to move, but Spawn wasn't finished. His chains, now engulfed in hellfire, shot down Hawks' arms and legs, wrapping them tightly. "I won't kill you," Spawn finally said, his voice like thunder in the night.
That would be too easy. With a brutal yank, the chains ripped Hawks's arms and legs off, cauterizing the stumps instantly with hellish fire. Hawks lay on the ground, screaming in agony as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. Spawn leaned over him, his eyes blazing with implacable hatred. "You're not a hero. You're an executioner in the service of a rotten system. Now, you'll live the rest of your life as what you truly are. Powerless, useless, a reminder of your own crimes." With those words, Spawn stepped back, leaving Hawks bleeding emotionally out in the street, unable to move. The street fell silent, save for Hawks's moans of pain. Spawn, wrapped in his cloak, disappeared into the night, leaving behind the results of his brutal justice. The January cold intensified, but for Hawks, the chill didn't come from the weather, but from the terrifying reality of what had just happened. His life, his career, and everything he had ever been were now shattered, both physically and emotionally. On that night, Spawn's legend as the relentless Avenger only grew more terrifying to those who knew him as an inescapable shadow of judgment.
The night was cold and silent as Momo and Himiko scoured the streets, desperately searching for Izuku. They knew he'd gone after Hawks, and while they didn't know all the details, they both understood that this confrontation was personal.
After a while, as they walked down a dark street, they saw him. Spawn, his cloak trailing behind him, was walking slowly toward the church. His imposing figure was bathed in the dim light from the streetlights, but something about his posture betrayed the weight he carried. Momo and Himiko exchanged a glance. There was no need for words. They both understood that she wouldn't talk about what she'd done, at least not now.
When Izuku reached the church entrance, Himiko and Momo quickly caught up with him. Himiko was the first to approach, her eyes filled with concern. Without saying anything, she threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around him.
"We know you don't want to talk," Himiko said softly, resting her head against his chest, "but we're here for you." Momo, a little more reserved, stepped forward and hugged him as well, wrapping her arms around his back as her red cape fluttered slightly. "Izuku, you don't have to carry all of this alone. We're with you, always." Izuku didn't say anything, but his chains, normally restless and aggressive, calmed, remaining still as if responding to the moment. The cloak wrapped around him seemed to loosen, allowing the warmth of the two girls to reach him. The three figures stood silently in front of the church in the chilly January air. Himiko, Momo, and Izuku shared a moment of connection that required no words. Although Izuku couldn't express what he felt, he knew he wasn't alone. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Izuku lifted a hand and gently stroked Himiko's head, then Momo's. Though her face was still covered by the hellish mask, her eyes shone with a less fierce, more restrained intensity. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice deep but full of sincerity. Momo and Himiko grew apart a little, but not completely. They knew they couldn't erase the pain Izuku felt, but they were determined to stay by his side, offering him the support he needed. Together, the three returned to the church, where Ares slept, oblivious to the chaos of the outside world. That night, though the pain still throbbed in Izuku's heart, he knew he wasn't alone in facing it. The attack on Hawks, one of the most respected and recognized figures among the heroes, deeply shook the professional hero community. Although the exact details were not released to the public, images leaked through the shadows of the internet showed the brutality of the confrontation and Hawks's condition: mutilated, wingless, armless, and legless. Spawn wasn't just an enemy. He was a symbol of a corrupt system crumbling and, for many, a reminder that heroes weren't untouchable. Fear began to spread among the heroes, especially those who had some connection to the Hero Commission. Many began to reevaluate their priorities, wondering if continuing in that world was worth it. Among the first to resign were Midnight and Mount Lady, two heroines who had dedicated themselves to the profession but now saw the situation in a different light. Nomori Kayama spent days reflecting before making her decision. Although she had dedicated her life to being a hero, the recent events with Spawn and the revelations about the Commission's corruption had left her questioning everything. "I can't ignore this anymore," Nomori said during a conversation with her inner circle. "The system is broken, and I can't continue to be part of something that allows so much injustice." She decided to focus on something she'd always felt was missing in the world of heroes: psychological and emotional support. Using her experience and knowledge, she began to dedicate herself to the practice of psychology, helping both heroes and citizens deal with the stress and trauma imposed on them by the system. If I can't save lives in the countryside, at least I can save them here, Nomori said, as she opened her small clinic in the heart of the city. Yu Takayama was another hero who had decided to step back. Although her career as a hero had brought her fame and recognition, Spawn's attack and the growing fear of being the next target made her reconsider her priorities. I always wanted to be a model, Yu said in an interview after her resignation. Being a heroine was amazing, but I think it's time to explore other parts of my life. With her charisma and beauty, it wasn't difficult for her to launch a new career as a model. Her transition was well received by her fans, who supported her decision to prioritize her personal well-being. The world needs heroes, but it also needs people who take care of themselves, Yu said. The resignation of such prominent figures as Midnight and Mount Lady sent shockwaves through the hero community. Many began to question whether it was worth continuing in a profession where danger came not only from villains, but also from the shadows of the very system they were sworn to serve. Spawn hadn't just attacked physically. He'd destabilized the very core of what it meant to be a hero in a world where the lines between good and evil were increasingly blurred. Nezu's office was silent, save for the soft crackling of the fire in the room's small fireplace. Even though it was the holiday season, he didn't allow himself to rest. His mind was occupied with the news he had just received, each one more troubling than the last. In front of him, Toshinori Yagi, the man who had once been All Might, wore a grave expression as he explained the situation. The attack on Hawks has had a devastating impact, Nezu, Toshinori said, his voice low but firm. It wasn't just the attack itself, but the way it happened. Hawks was left unrecognizable. The rumors in the hero community are chilling. Spawn didn't just defeat him, he destroyed him. Nezu nodded slowly, his small hands clasped on the desk. His normally astute gaze was tinged with concern. And the repercussions? Toshinori sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. Nomori has resigned. She says she can no longer be part of the system. Yu Takayama has also stepped down from her position as a hero. She says she needs to focus on her personal life. Nezu closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. Two prominent heroines leaving the field. This not only affects morale, but also the public perception of the heroes. That's not all, Toshinori continued, his voice even deeper. I've received several emails from parents of our students. They say they don't trust UA to protect their children, especially after the attack on the camp and what happened with Hawks. Some have decided to withdraw their children from the school. Nezu opened his eyes, his ears pricking up slightly upon hearing this. How many? So far, 5 families have confirmed their decision. But I fear this number will grow if we don't do something to regain public trust. Nezu leaned back in his chair, staring at the fire in the fireplace. Recent events affected not only the heroes, but also the future of the heroic world. The resignation of prominent figures, the fear of the citizens, and now, the loss of UA students, indicated that the system was in a deeper crisis than he had imagined.
Spawn is destroying more than lives, Nezu murmured, his tone calculating. He's destroying the very structure of the system that sustains our society. And the worst part is, he's attacking where it hurts most, trust.
Toshinori leaned forward, his expression serious. What can we do, Nezu? We can't ignore this. Nezu remained silent for a moment, considering his options. First, we must strengthen our security. We can't allow another incident like the one at the camp to happen again. Second, we need to work on a strategy to regain public trust. If that means being completely transparent with parents, then it's a risk we must take.
Toshinori nodded slowly, though he still looked worried.
And what do we do with Spawn? Nezu looked directly at Toshinori, his eyes shining with determination.
Spawn isn't a problem we can solve with brute force. He's a symptom of something bigger, a system that has failed many people, including him. If we want to stop it, we must first understand it. And to understand it, we need someone who can talk to it.
Toshinori frowned. Are you serious? Do you think anyone can reason with him after what he's done?
Nezu leaned forward, a small smile on his face. I think there's someone who might try. But it would be a risk.
Toshinori didn't ask who, but in his heart, he feared what Nezu was planning. Meanwhile, the fire in the fireplace continued to burn, reflecting the seriousness of the situation they both faced. The meeting room was unusually quiet, a heavy atmosphere that contrasted with the lively conversations that usually took place there. Nezu, sitting in his chair, watched Momo Yaoyorozu intently, who had returned to UA just for this meeting. Her posture was firm, and her eyes reflected a determination that Nezu couldn't ignore. Momo, I appreciate you agreeing to come, Nezu said, his tone calm but purposeful. I know you decided to leave UA, but I hope you understand the gravity of the situation. Momo nodded slightly, though her expression remained distant. I understand the gravity, Nezu. That's why I'm here, but not for the reasons you think. Nezu clasped his small hands together, leaning forward. I know you know Spawn's whereabouts. We need to get in touch with him before this gets even more out of hand. Not just for UA, but for society as a whole. Momo's face hardened upon hearing those words. By society? He repeated incredulously. Are you talking about the same society that allowed the Hero Commission to exist? The same society that justified the death of an innocent mother and the explosion of an apartment, all to protect peace? Nezu maintained his composure, even though Momo's words hit him hard. I don't deny that the system has flaws, serious flaws. But we can't let Spawn continue this way. He's destroying more than just corrupt people. He's destabilizing everything. Momo stood up from her seat, her voice trembling slightly with indignation. And you think you can reason with him? Spawn isn't fighting for an ideal, Nezu. He's fighting for justice, something the system has denied him time and time again. Nezu, though seemingly unfazed, attempted to appeal to her once more. Momo, this isn't just for us. It's for the innocent people who will suffer if the system completely collapses. For the children who look to heroes as a symbol of hope. The words seemed to sink in, but only for a moment. Her resolve was already cemented, and she wasn't going to budge. She took a small USB flash drive out of her bag and placed it on the table in front of Nezu. Here's a copy of all the information I obtained from the Commission's hard drives, he said, his tone cold. Read it, maybe then you'll understand why I refuse to help you. Nezu took the USB in his small hands, observing it carefully. That's all? Momo nodded, her gaze direct and challenging. That's all. I have nothing else to say. With those words, Momo turned and left the room without looking back. Nezu remained silent, holding the USB, aware that he had just missed a crucial opportunity. But he also knew that what was inside that small device could change everything. As Momo walked away, her mind was calm. She'd made her choice. Izuku, Himiko, and Eri were her family now, and she wasn't going to betray their trust, no matter how much Nezu insisted. Nezu, sitting alone in his office, inserted the USB into his personal computer. The soft lights of the monitor illuminated his small face as he began to review the information Momo had left him. As he read, his calm expression slowly crumbled, giving way to visible horror in his eyes. Every file, every document and video, accurately detailed the systemic corruption of the Hero Commission. There were records of covert murders, manipulation of public opinion, and the incident that led to Spawn's creation, the explosion of Izuku Midoriya's apartment. As he reviewed the files, Nezu began to connect the dots. Spawn's brutality, his direct focus on the Commission and key figures like Hawks, and Momo's protectiveness over his whereabouts. It all fit. Spawn was Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy who had disappeared after his apartment exploded. The young director closed his eyes for a moment, processing the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Izuku Midoriya, he muttered to himself. How did we get to this? But before she could think of a plan of action, her attention was interrupted by the sound of notifications on her computer. She opened several pop-up windows and, to her horror, saw headlines across every media outlet. All the information about the USB had already been leaked to the public. Videos, reports, emails, and audio recordings were being shared on social media and news platforms. The truth about the Hero Commission and its role in Inko Midoriya's death, Izuku's attempted murder, and other atrocities had become public. The whole world was watching what Nezu had just discovered. Society was paralyzed by the impact. People who had idolized heroes for generations now saw the shadows behind the glitter. The reactions were immediate and chaotic. Protests erupted in several cities, demanding the dissolution of the Hero Commission and justice for the victims. Many heroes resigned immediately, unable to face public pressure. Others attempted to justify their actions, but their words fell on deaf ears. Newscasts analyzed every detail of the leaked files,
showing images and testimonies that exposed the corruption of the hero system.
The incident that most shocked the public was the video of Hawks murdering Inko Midoriya and planting the bomb in her apartment. For many, this act symbolized the level of corruption the system had reached. Nezu slumped back in his chair, staring at the screen with a weight he'd never felt before. Everything he'd built, everything he thought he stood for, was now in ruins. The system is broken, and there's no way to fix it now, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I knew that UA, as a symbol of the hero system, was also in danger. The emails from parents withdrawing their children were just the beginning. Institutions that supported heroes were already withdrawing their funding, and public trust in heroes was at rock bottom. As the world struggled to process the truth, Nezu gazed out at the horizon from his window. He knew that this leak had not only exposed the system but had also paved the way for a new era, one where heroes were no longer seen as untouchable figures. And at the center of it all, in the shadows of the night, stood Spawn, a symbol of unforgiving justice that neither forgot nor forgave. Nezu, though horrified by Izuku's methods, couldn't deny that the system had created its own destroyer. The world had changed forever, and now, everyone would have to face the truth. Nezu watched the flashing headlines flooding his monitor. The chaos he'd anticipated had arrived faster than he expected. But instead of becoming distressed, a soft, almost bitter laugh escaped his lips. When Toshinori Yagi, worried and anxious, entered the room, he stopped when he heard that laughter. He had never seen Nezu react that way, and the tone made him even more uneasy. Nezu? Toshinori asked, frowning as he took a step forward. What happened? Did Momo give you Spawn's whereabouts? Nezu turned slowly in his chair, his small eyes shining with a mixture of bitterness and resignation. He pointed at the screen, where the headlines continued to scroll. The truth behind the heroes exposed to the world, the Hero Commission, a nest of corruption, and Spawn, the executioner of a rotten system. No, Toshinori. He didn't give us his whereabouts, but I don't think it matters anymore. Toshinori frowned even more, confused. What do you mean it doesn't matter? Spawn's still out there, dismantling everything we're trying to protect. Nezu smiled slightly, his soft laughter filling the room again. That's the irony, isn't it? Hero Society, so focused on creating a perfect image, on hunting all for one for decades, ignored the seeds of its own destruction. And now, those seeds have sprouted. Toshinori remained silent, processing Nezu's words. Finally, he stepped toward the screen and read some of the headlines. The gravity of the situation hit home as he watched Hero Society crumble in real time.
Spawn, Toshinori muttered. Do you think it's our fault?
Nezu looked at him directly, his tone firm but not accusatory. Spawn? I don't just think we believe it, Toshinori. I'm certain of it. Izuku Midoriya, the boy you rejected, the boy the system ignored, the boy they tried to erase, is now judge, jury, and executioner. Spawn wasn't born of hatred, he was born of betrayal and indifference. Toshinori stepped back, feeling the weight of Nezu's words. The guilt he'd felt since rejecting Izuku now intensified, becoming an almost unbearable burden. But, I just wanted to protect him. Nezu nodded slowly. And in your attempt to protect him, you abandoned him, and you weren't the only one. The entire system abandoned him. Spawn is the manifestation of everything the system tried to ignore, erase, or cover up. He's a reflection of our failures, Toshinori. And now, he's getting justice in his own way. Nezu leaned back in his chair, his small hands clasped together as he watched the news. We focus so much on image, so much on perfection, that we forget the real purpose of being heroes, to protect people, not to protect a system. Toshinori, unable to respond, could only stare at the screen in silence. Spawn hadn't just dismantled the Hero Commission, he'd destroyed trust in everything the heroes stood for. Hero Society created its own destroyer, Nezu finally said, his voice low but clear. And now, Toshinori, the true trial has begun.
The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the monitor projecting the crumbling of an era.
Hawks opened his eyes slowly, the sterile white light of the hospital momentarily blinding him. His body felt heavy, but when he tried to move, a deep terror gripped him. He couldn't feel his arms, his legs, or his wings.
The memory of his confrontation with Spawn came flooding back. The brutality, the pain, the hellish fire that consumed everything that had once defined him. He looked down and saw the cauterized stumps where his limbs had once been. A single tear rolled down his cheek, followed by a silent cry. The sound of the door opening interrupted her emotional collapse. A woman in a formal suit entered, her face impassive, though her posture betrayed tension. She was a representative of what remained of the Hero Commission.
Keigo Takami, he said in a professional, yet cold, tone. I have information you need to know. Hawks looked up, his expression a mixture of pain and despair. What happened? The woman, holding a tablet, sighed before continuing. The video of the Midoriya apartment explosion has been leaked. Everything. Your involvement, the Commission's orders, and the details of the cover-up. The whole world knows now. Hawks's heart sank further, his breathing quickening. No, it can't be. The representative looked at him with a hard expression. The Hero Commission will no longer exist as of next week. The leak destroyed any credibility we had. Our assets are being frozen, and our key allies have abandoned us. There's nothing we can do. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hawks tried to find the words, but there was nothing he could say. His life as a hero, his identity, everything he had built, had crumbled in a matter of days. Spawn. He finally murmured, his voice filled with rage and despair. He promised me this. The representative nodded, her tone dry, and he kept his promise. What's left of the Commission can't help you, Hawks. You're on your own. Hawks closed his eyes, the weight of his situation falling upon him like a slab. Spawn hadn't just destroyed him physically, he'd condemned him to a personal hell he couldn't escape. The woman left the room, leaving Hawks alone. The sound of his ventilator and medical monitors was the only thing that broke the silence. As tears streamed down his face, Hawks realized his hell had just begun. Unable to move, unable to fly, and now, without a commission to protect him, he was completely alone. And deep in his mind, a voice echoed, "We do not forget, we do not forgive." The revelation of the leaked files had left the world in shock. The streets, which would normally have been a hive of protest and chaos, were unusually calm. However, this peace wasn't a reflection of acceptance or stability, it was an unsettling calm born of fear. Hawks's face, once seen as the charismatic and promising hero of the new generation, was now synonymous with betrayal and corruption. Footage of his involvement in the explosion of the Midoriya's apartment, along with the clinical details of his execution, circulated across social media and news channels. Is this the true face of heroes? Citizens asked in forums and debates. If Hawks, one of the best, could do something like that, what does that tell us about the rest of us? On the streets, Hawks's posters had been removed or vandalized, and his name was spoken of with contempt. Some called him a monster, others a traitor, but all agreed on one thing. Hawks was the symbol of everything wrong with heroic society. The true source of the unsettling calm wasn't just the hero's fall, but Spawn's shadow now looming over everyone. Ordinary citizens, remaining heroes, and even villains feared becoming his next target. Spawn's brutality had been seared into the collective memory. His attack on Hawks and his bloody confrontation with All for One proved that there was no distinction between corrupt heroes and villains. All were within reach of his judgment. Criminal leaders began to operate more cautiously, reducing visible activities to avoid attracting his attention. Some small groups dissolved entirely, unable to withstand the strain of living under the constant threat of Spawn. Did you see what he did to Hawks? To All for One? I don't want to end up like this. This is neither a hero nor a villain. He's a demon who won't stop until we all pay. Ordinary citizens also felt the weight of fear. While many were relieved to see the corruption exposed, others feared that the void left by the corrupt heroes would bring unpredictable consequences. Discussions on social media were divided. Some supported Spawn's actions as a necessary evil, while others feared that he would become more dangerous over time. Families began moving away from major cities, seeking to escape the epicenter of tension. Despite the uncertainty, something unexpected happened. The crime rate began to decline. Not because there were more heroes or justice, but because both villains and criminals feared Spawn's retaliation. We used to fear heroes, now we fear something much worse. Even the remaining heroes were paralyzed. With the system in ruins and public opinion against them, many chose to quietly retreat, leaving the streets emptier than ever. Spawn hadn't just become the destroyer of the system, He was now the symbol of inescapable judgment. His brutality and relentless pursuit of justice had transformed heroic society into something unrecognizable. The prevailing peace wasn't a sign of stability, but rather of a society teetering on the brink, fearful of making a false move. And at the center of it all, Spawn loomed like an ever-present shadow, reminding the world that neither heroes nor villains were safe from his judgment. We do not forget. We do not forgive. Following the fall of the hero system in Japan, society was forced to quickly adapt to a world without heroes. What had once been a pillar of stability and hope for many had collapsed, and now the country was heading toward a new normal. Prestigious hero schools, including UA, shut down their hero training programs. Institutions that had once been symbols of greatness and aspiration for young people were now viewed as relics of a corrupt system. Instead, schools began offering regular educational programs, focusing on developing citizens capable of contributing to society in different ways. The transition wasn't easy, but most students and their families accepted the change with resignation. "It's a new beginning," said one of the directors in an interview. "Our students now have the opportunity to explore other paths." For students already enrolled in advanced hero programs, alternatives were offered. Many were admitted to law enforcement and rescue services, areas that still needed trained personnel to respond to emergencies. However, not everyone embraced this change enthusiastically. A small group of students, still clinging to the idea of heroes, expressed their discontent. They believed the closure of the programs was a mistake and that heroes were still necessary to society. Despite the protests, most students accepted the change, understanding that the hero system was no longer viable. The most striking impact of the fall of the heroic system was the dramatic drop in crime. The streets were calmer than ever, not because of an increase in justice, but because of fear of Spawn's brutality. Petty crime almost disappeared. Thieves, con artists, and even small-time gang members chose to keep a low profile, fearful that any act might attract Spawn's attention. "Robbing a bank? No way," said one ex-criminal in an anonymous interview. "I'd rather starve than end up like Hawks." Spawn doesn't differentiate between corrupt heroes and villains, opined one social analyst. It's a reminder that anyone who crosses certain lines will be punished mercilessly. Japanese society began to adapt to this new order. Although initially uncertain, many people found solace in the apparent peace. Although his brutality was feared, some began to see him as a balancing force, a reminder that no one was above justice. A minority continued to cling to the days of heroes, expressing sadness at the loss of figures who had symbolized hope. With the heroes out of the picture, Japan embarked on an uncertain path. Government institutions and local communities had to assume responsibilities that had previously fallen to the heroes. Although peace prevailed, it wasn't the peace many had imagined. It was a fragile calm, sustained by the fear of a being who operated outside the rules of the system. Spawn hadn't disappeared. His presence was a constant shadow that kept everyone on alert. Society had changed forever, and while the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: no one wanted to risk being Spawn's next target. With the fall of the Hero Commission, the few heroes who tried to remain united faced a harsh reality. Without resources, government support, or funding, their work became increasingly unsustainable. Teams and agencies that relied on the Commission's financial support began to close, leaving the heroes at a crossroads. Although retired, Toshinori Yagi, the man who was all might, tried to keep his small agency open. It was a refuge for those who still wanted to be heroes and believed in the possibility of regaining the public's trust. However, the task was monumental. The donations they once received were now scarce, and the lack of resources made even the simplest operations difficult to execute. "We're doing the best we can, but we need to prove that we can still make a difference," Toshinori said at a meeting with the few remaining heroes, though even among the most loyal, doubts were growing. Mirio Tagata, the successor to One for All, had been a shining light in the world of heroes. His optimism and unwavering energy had made him a symbol of hope for many. But even Mirio was reconsidering his path. "Toshinori-sensei," Mirio said one day, while the two of them were alone in the agency office. "I've been thinking. Maybe I should join the rescue force." Toshinori looked at him in surprise, though not anger. "Why, Mirio? Why would you consider leaving the path of the hero?" Mirio looked down, his usual smile gone. "I don't know if this world needs heroes right now. Spawn. His shadow is everywhere. People aren't looking for hope. They're looking for security. Maybe I can help better by saving lives directly, without worrying about the image of being a hero. Toshinori felt a weight on his chest. He understood Mirio's words, but hearing his successor, the wielder of One for All, express such doubts was a blow he hadn't anticipated. That night, Toshinori sat alone in his agency's empty office, staring at an old All Might poster hanging on the wall. His past self's confident smile seemed almost ironic now. The piece I built is no more, he thought as he looked at his weakened hands. All for One is dead, but at what cost? Did he take my purpose with him? Spawn's shadow hung over even Toshinori. Though his goal had always been to defeat All for One, he never imagined the void left by his death would be filled by something so dark and brutal. Did I fail? He asked himself, over and over. Did my struggle only fuel the collapse? All Might's agency remained the last bastion for those who believed in heroes. But even that fortress was faltering. Resources were dwindling, and the weight of reality was leading many, even the strongest, to reconsider their role in this new world. Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, watched as the peace he had sacrificed his life and health for crumbled. And though he continued to struggle to maintain hope, he couldn't help but wonder if the world no longer had room for heroes like him. In an abandoned warehouse, covered in dust and shadows, Shigaraki Tamura sat alone, surrounded by silence. The days of chaos he had once longed for, the meticulously constructed plans to destroy heroic society, were now irrelevant. Spawn had dismantled everything he and All for One had spent years trying to destroy. Shigaraki, the supposed leader of the League of Villains, was now a man without purpose. The League of Villains, once a constant threat to society, had fallen apart. Its members, terrified by Spawn's brutality, had disappeared one by one. Himiko Toga had fled with Spawn, finding purpose and family in him, while Dabi had set off to pursue his own personal revenge against Spawn, leaving Shigaraki without his second in command. Other members, like Twice and Spinner, had simply dissolved into obscurity, leaving chaos behind. Shigaraki was completely alone. Although everyone believed Shigaraki was the mastermind behind the League, the truth was much sadder. He was a lost child, molded by All for One, and without his master's guidance, he didn't know what to do. What am I supposed to do now? He muttered, compulsively scratching his neck, a nervous habit that worsened when he was anxious. He looked around at the emptiness of the warehouse. All that remained were the echoes of his failure. Spawn hadn't just destroyed the heroes, but the villains as well. There was no system to attack, no society to overthrow. Everything Shigaraki wanted to destroy was already in ruins. Everything. He took it, she whispered, her voice filled with frustration and despair. All for One's death had left a void impossible to fill. Although Shigaraki had presented himself as the League's leader, he had always been a follower, a pawn molded by his master's power and manipulation. You didn't teach me what to do now, he shouted into the air, as if All for One could hear him from beyond the grave. His voice echoed in the empty hold, a mixture of rage and sadness. Without All for One to guide him, Shigaraki didn't know how to face this new world. He had no allies, no plans, no purpose. He was left with nothing but emptiness. Shigaraki, sitting on the ground, looked at his trembling hands. Although they were filled with the power of destruction, he had nothing left to destroy. The society he hated so much no longer existed, and with it, his reason for existence had also disappeared. Deep down, he'd always been a boy trapped in a cycle of hatred and manipulation. Without All for One, his life lacked direction. Spawn hadn't just destroyed Hero Society, he'd also destroyed Shigaraki Tamura, leaving a boy lost in the ruins of his own ambition. With a heavy sigh, Shigaraki dropped his head into his hands. In a world that no longer had room for heroes or villains, he was just another bystander, caught in the collapse of an era. The cold January wind pierced the desolate city streets, taking with it the last breaths of Dabi's life, as he lay in a dark, filthy alley. His body, once the instrument of his chaos, was now a withered shell, a victim of the neglect he had always ignored. The burned flesh covering much of his body had begun to fester months ago. At first, he ignored it, focused solely on his search for Spawn, the monster who had destroyed his father and his purpose. But without the medical care his fragile body needed, the infection spread rapidly, sapping what little remained of his strength. Dabi leaned against the damp wall of the alley, each breath a titanic effort. His pale blue eyes stared up at the sky, their light slowly fading. "Is this what I deserve?" he murmured, his voice broken and barely audible. There was no one to answer. No one to listen. "The world," he continued, his words choked with bitterness, "took everything from me. My family, my purpose, my revenge. Everything." Tears began to stream down her face, mixing with the sweat and blood covering her skin. She wanted to scream, to complain to the world, but she didn't have the strength.
"Endeavor, can't even," he tried to say, but his voice faded to a whisper.
There was no final explosion, no grandiose climax. It didn't unleash the chaos it had so promised. Just one man, broken and forgotten, facing his own mortality in the darkest corner of a city that wouldn't even remember him. Dobby, with his last breath, let his head fall to the side. His body, overcome by the infection, completely relaxed as the life drained away. In that moment, he wasn't a villain, not a Todoroki, not a wielder of blue flames. He was just an abandoned man, a reflection of a world that had forgotten those who didn't fit its mold.
The alley remained silent, save for the wind that continued to blow, carrying with it the last traces of a man who only wanted to be seen, heard, and avenged.
In a world changed by Spawn's brutality and the fall of heroes, Dobby's death was just another note in a symphony of tragedy. His once burning flame was extinguished without a trace. The world had changed drastically in the decades since the fall of the hero system. Although the fear that Spawn instilled was still remembered, society had begun to rebuild around a new normal. Without heroes or villains, people learned to fend for themselves and find more communal ways of living. With the villain records erased and the hero system dismantled, Himiko Toga was finally able to integrate into society without fear of persecution. With the help of Momo, who had used her influence to open up opportunities, Himiko and Eri moved into a modest apartment in the city. Himiko found work at Momo's company, helping others who had also been marginalized or suffered under the old system. Although the scars of her past were still present, Himiko strove to create a safe and loving environment for Eri. Eri, now a teenager, grew up in a loving and understanding environment. Although the scars of her childhood would never completely disappear, her bond with Himiko and the ever-present figure of Spawn as her protector gave her the strength to move forward.
Izuku Midoriya, now known exclusively as Spawn, remained in the abandoned church that had once been his refuge. He knew he couldn't be with Himiko and Eri like a traditional father, but that didn't mean he didn't watch over them.
From the shadows, Izuku continued to protect them. Any threat that might arise against them was eliminated before it even manifested. Spawn was a silent vigilante, a protector who never stopped loving the two most important people in his life. Although his presence was limited, Himiko and Eri knew he was always nearby, and that gave them a peace that nothing else could offer. Momo Yaoyorozu had become the director of an influential company dedicated to helping people in vulnerable situations. Inspired by the experiences of Izuku, Himiko, and Eri, her mission was to build a world where no one was left behind. With her family's resources and connections, Momo facilitated Himiko's legal adoption of Eri. Although Izuku Midoriya's name wasn't officially registered, to Himiko and Eri, he would always be their father. Momo also visited Izuku at the church from time to time, bringing him news of Himiko and Eri. Though their conversations were brief and filled with silences, they shared a deep understanding of what they had lost and gained over the years. One winter night, Himiko and Eri sat on the small sofa in their apartment, watching a movie while sharing a blanket. Eri, now more confident, leaned against Himiko with a calm smile. "Mom, do you think Dad's okay?" Eri asked, referring to Izuku. Himiko stroked Eri's white hair and nodded. "Of course, honey. Dad's always looking out for us, even if we don't see him every day." At the church, Izuku watched from a broken window, his figure hidden in the shadows. Even though he couldn't physically be with them, knowing they were happy and safe was all he needed to keep going. 10 years after the fall of the heroes, the world was still imperfect, but in that imperfection, Himiko, Eri and Izuku found something they never thought they would have: peace and a family. The fall of the Hero Commission in Japan marked the beginning of a global transformation. Governments in other countries, observing the devastating impact of Spawn and the disintegration of Japanese heroic society, began investigating their own heroic organizations. The fear that another Spawn might emerge in their territories led to drastic decisions. Within a matter of years, the heroic system that once dominated the world began to disappear. Investigations launched in various countries revealed similar patterns of corruption, cover-ups, and abuses of power in heroic institutions. Heroes, once seen as symbols of hope, were now subjected to relentless scrutiny. In the United States, conspiracies were uncovered between heroes and large corporations that used their influence to maintain the status quo, often at the cost of innocent lives. In Europe, hero organizations were accused of covering up cases of abuse of power, while local governments relied on them to control the public narrative. In Asia, other countries in the region followed Japan's example, gradually dismantling their own heroic institutions to prevent future internal conflicts. The decline was inevitable. Without public support and with mounting evidence of corruption, hero systems around the world began to collapse. Many heroes decided to retire, some under the guise of protecting themselves from potential retaliation, while others simply couldn't bear the pressure of being associated with such a tainted system. Hero schools were transformed into regular institutions, and hero agencies were dismantled. The idolatry of heroes gave way to a more communal approach, where people learned to rely on one another rather than glorified figures.
With the heroic system gone, heroes began to be remembered only in media and fiction. Movies, books, and comics reimagined heroic stories, adapting them to a world that now viewed heroes with a mixture of nostalgia and skepticism.
Hawk's Last Flight. It became one of the most popular films, a dramatization of the fall of one of the most recognizable heroes. Spawn, though feared in life, was also mythologized in popular culture, depicted as a dark vigilante who dismantled a corrupt system at the cost of his humanity.
The disappearance of the heroic world left a void, but it also allowed for the emergence of new social structures. Instead of relying on heroes, communities began to organize to protect and aid one another. Many governments implemented reforms to prevent future abuses of power, inspired by the fear of a new Spawn. Schools began to emphasize cooperation and conflict resolution, teaching children that true strength lay in working together, not in relying on idealized figures.
Although heroes as an institution disappeared, their impact remained in the collective memory. For some, they were remembered as symbols of hope, for others, as reminders of the dangers of idolatry and corruption. And in the shadows of a changed world, Spawn remained a living testament to unrelenting justice. Though the heroes had vanished, his story was still told, as a warning and a lesson. The world had changed, not for better or worse, but toward an uncertain balance that depended on people's will to build something new. The abandoned church was silent, illuminated only by the dim light of the candles Himiko and Eri had left during their last visit. Izuku Midoriya, now known as Spawn, sat in one of the old pews, his towering figure wrapped in the red cloak that seemed to move as if it had a life of its own. The last 10 years had been a constant struggle. Since returning through hell after his deal with Malbolgia, he dedicated every moment to hunting down those who harmed the innocent, those who abused their power to cause suffering. He had fulfilled his revenge, but he hadn't stopped there. He had found a purpose: to be the protector of the forgotten, the judge of a world that had lost its way. Spawn looked down at his hands, still covered in the hellish suit Malbolgia had given him. It was a constant reminder of his doom, that he had sold his soul to return to the world of the living. But, even with that burden, Izuku couldn't help but feel grateful. "I was able to return," he murmured softly, his words echoing in the emptiness of the church. "I was able to see them again." Himiko and Eri were his family, his light in a world plunged into darkness. Knowing they were safe, living normal lives, was the only thing that gave him peace. Momo, with her dedication and kindness, had become a pillar for them and for him. She never judged him for what he had become, but always saw him as someone who did what was necessary for those who couldn't defend themselves. On the loneliest nights, when the silence became unbearable, Izuku wondered what his mother thought of him. Inko Midoriya, who had given him all the love she could offer, had always dreamed of a bright future for her son. "Would you be proud of me, Mom?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Or would you be horrified by what I've become?" The memory of his mother gave him strength, but it also tormented him. Would she have approved of his methods? Or would she have wept for the monster he was now? Izuku would never know the answer, but in his heart, he always fought to protect the innocent as she had protected him. The deal with Malbolgia remained a constant shadow over his existence. He knew he was doomed to lead Hell's army at Armageddon, but he also knew he wouldn't allow that to happen while Himiko, Eri, and Momo were in the world. If Malbolgia thinks he can unleash Armageddon while they're here, he's mistaken. she said resolutely, her voice ringing like an oath. Though doomed, Izuku had found a greater purpose: to protect not only his family, but the world he had learned to value again. Izuku stood up from the pew, his cape billowing around him like a living cloak. He looked up at the broken cross hanging at the front of the church and gave a small smile. Even a condemned man can do good. He had accepted his fate, but he had also decided that he wouldn't be defined solely by his dealings with Hell. Spawn, the being who had struck fear into heroes and villains alike, had become something more. A protector, a guardian, and, at his core, a man who still fought for what was right. As she walked out of the church into the cold night, she knew her fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt peace. Because, even though her soul was damned, her heart was still that of Izuku Midoriya, the boy who never stopped wanting to protect others. The end. If you have watched till end, drop black hearts in comments so I can know. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now we will see you in the next video.